Be able to pick up on nonverbal cues and interactions so people remote feel like they're in the room with people that are. The idea is to bridge the gap across the hybrid workspace. This slide gives us an idea of the event structure, so we'll talk security and compliance as we go, and then chats, collaboration, apps and workflows, as well as meetings and calls. With messaging, we can have one-to-one chats, we can have group chats, we can post messages in private channels if we desire. We'll have at least one org-wide team. We can have up to 5, as well as some public and private teams. Similarly, we'll explore standard channels and private channels, and the new shared channels are an option as well. You can see here various apps and workflows, some available in Microsoft's App Store. We're going to go more detail in some low-code solutions coming up. And for full-code solutions, we're talking professional developer apps, which is beyond the scope of this course. We now have webinars available in Teams, and you can constrain sign-up for the webinars based on responses to some filtering questions. That ties in nicely with Dynamics 365 marketing. Teams live events are qualitatively different from your regular team meetings. Think of town halls. You can have up to 20,000 attendees for Teams live events. Typically you have extra personnel involved, maybe some third-party equipment as well. More on that coming up. We can have calls not just between Teams clients on various devices, but also calls to regular PSTN devices. So we can call landlines, mobile phones. As you'd expect, Teams integrates nicely with the suite of Microsoft 365 apps and services like Outlook, SharePoint, Yammer, and more. For the Power Platform, we can use this to create low-code solutions to simplify work, all from within Teams. At its foundation, these solutions are powered by Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, which is a built-in low-code data platform for Teams. Comprised of 4 solutions. Power Apps is the low-code app development solution that allows anyone to build an app without coding experience. Power BI is our leading business analytics and visualization solution that allows you to derive insights and build powerful visualizations on top. Power Automate is our workflow automation solution that allows users to build simple and powerful automation solutions, simplifying everyday business processes. And Power Virtual Agents is our intelligent virtual agent solution, allowing users to easily build virtual agents and bots without needing a background in code or AI. All of these seamlessly connect within Teams, allowing you to build truly custom solutions that can be used right where you work. We can embed a Canvas or model-driven app as a tab app in Teams channels. We can pin a Canvas app to the Microsoft Teams app navigation bar as a Teams personal app, and also create Canvas apps using Power Apps in Teams. With Power Automate, we can automate not just workflows, but also tasks and improve agility and productivity. So we can create, manage, and trigger flows from within Teams. We can post messages to channels from a flow and streamline approval processes, expense approvals, for example. With Power Virtual Agents, we can create chatbots to answer frequently asked questions posed by internal or external stakeholders, and we can create, author, test, and publish chatbots directly from Teams, and then analyze performance of the bot. Based on interactions, we can see, oh, we need a different branch here, or a different question, or a different response because of the nature of the queries we're receiving. And then we can also have bots automatically take action on behalf of a user. Power BI lets us bring data to life with powerful visualizations, so we can make decisions confidently and quickly. We can have a Power BI tab in Teams, and we can embed interactive reports in Teams channels and chats, and even surface activity from Power BI and get notified directly in Teams. The Microsoft Dataverse for Teams gives us rich data types with enterprise capabilities, one-click solution deployment, so we can create custom apps. We can build workflows triggered when data changes in Dataverse for Teams. We can have chatbots for FAQ responses, and then dashboards so we can explore and interact with data in Dataverse for Teams. Notice how in the Microsoft Teams architecture, other Microsoft services are leveraged, like SharePoint and OneDrive for storage of wikis and files. We've got Exchange Online for user and group mailboxes, also voicemail if that's enabled. Also in the user mailboxes, we have call and meeting summaries. Meetings and calls go through the Skype calling and meeting services. And we have one-to-one and group chats, which go through the chat service and again end up in user and group mailboxes. Files live in OneDrive. There are a variety of Microsoft Teams certified solutions. You might be an app vendor. You might have a microphone or headset or puck for meeting room, or maybe you have Surface Hubs. All these are supported, and there's a list of certified devices you can access. There's also a certified contact center certification program, certified compliance recording, more on that later, certified session border controllers, and also certified cloud video interop, or CVI. This is a Microsoft qualified third-party solution to enable third-party meeting rooms, telepresence, and personal video devices, VTCs, to join Microsoft Teams meetings. Why? Well, many customers have already invested in video teleconferencing and personal video communication devices, which can be expensive to upgrade. Cloud Video Interop provides an easy solution, so you can keep using your existing solutions until you're ready to upgrade. Now we'll talk about planning and deploying Microsoft Teams. There are now 5 rules, so we can delegate just the right kind of administrative access to manage our Teams deployment. At the top is the Teams Administrator. Teams admins can do anything. The new role is the Teams Device Administrator, which, as the name implies, allows the user in that role to manage devices configured for use with the Teams service. There's a Teams Communication Admin. They can manage calling and meetings features. And then a couple of, think of this as level 1, level 2 help desk. We have a Teams Communication Support Specialist. That's like level 1. So they can use some basic troubleshooting tools for Teams. Level 2, now you're talking Teams Communication Support Engineer. They get to use advanced tools. We can assign admin roles in Teams using a variety of locations. We can use the M365 Admin Center, the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. There's also Azure AD PowerShell for Graph module. The PowerShell syntax we're looking at on the screen here, we're going to be granting the Teams Administrator role to a user named Adele Vex W. We'll have some more examples of PowerShell syntax coming up. The Teams Admin Center is a web portal for settings, policies, app management, device management, and reporting. It's one place where Teams admins can do all their work. There's also a Teams PowerShell module. Now, to access the commandlets in the Teams PowerShell module, first we need to install that module using the syntax on screen. So the install module commandlet specifying Microsoft Teams. When we've done that, then we run the connect Microsoft Teams commandlet, which pops up a dialog box. We enter our admin credentials, and then our PowerShell session will be interacting with our Teams tenant. For bulk management, Graph APIs shine. There's also Teams clients where we can do things like create teams. We'll look at different ways of creating teams later on in this course. You'll need to know how to use several portals when you're administering Teams and other M365 resources. So there's the Microsoft 365 Admin Center at admin.microsoft.com. There's also the Azure AD Admin Center at aad.portal.azure.com. We use this portal for groups, for identity, for licenses, and access across the M365 space, not just Teams. We need to access the M365 Defender portal. We do that from security.microsoft.com. And we'll talk soon about safe attachments and safe links. We configure those from this portal. There is a compliance center at compliance.microsoft.com where we set up policies around data loss prevention, data retention, and e-discovery. We'll talk about each of those in turn as well coming up. It's good to plan for your Teams rollout in stages rather than just have everyone suddenly using Teams. No, it's good to have a group of pilot users representative of the roles in your organization. And we can roll out functionality like chat, Teams, channels and apps, set up meetings and conferencing, maybe some cloud voice. And we get some feedback and telemetry from our early adopters, and then we can maybe tweak some settings and bring on greater and greater numbers of people. Finally, everyone is using Teams in our org-wide rollout. Microsoft has a lot of tools available. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. All kinds of communication packages, so let your users know what's coming, and some training materials as well, so that people are less surprised on day one of the Teams rollout. Also a good idea to have help desk personnel roaming around and available to help as needed as users get used to working with Teams for the day-to-day work. There is a Teams advisor for implementing Teams capabilities like chats, Teams, conferences, upgrading from Skype for Business on premises. And like all M365 offerings, there is a Microsoft Fast Track offering as well. So this gives you guidance. There are free tools for planning, delivery, and adoption of Microsoft Teams. And depending on the number of seats you acquire, you can get even more support from Microsoft. The cutoff points for additional levels of support are 150 seats and 500 seats. It's good to adopt a phased approach when you deploy Teams. So first, understanding the capabilities of Teams and channels, and assess your organizational readiness. You don't want to do too many projects at once. You want to leave some gaps between projects so people get comfortable doing what they're doing with the new technology. After the start phase, we move to the experiment phase. It's good to have champions, people who are diehards, not necessarily tech or IT staff, but people that are good at rallying people to the cause, sort of informal support in their department, people that people naturally gravitate to if they have questions about a given technology. And they can be cheerleaders for adoption and usage of your Teams rollout. There's some governance as well to help your quick start program. Figure out some usage scenarios, and we want to get support up to speed as well so that help desk is prepared for inevitable questions from users on day one. Phase 3, we're going to scale, get more people involved, and implement training. Could be lunch bag sessions, could be intranet training videos, could be MS Learn content freely available online, could be more formal classroom training. Good to look at health reviews periodically as well. Let's talk licensing. There is a free license for Teams that's available standalone, or you can bundle Teams and other Microsoft apps and services such as Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. We also need to consider our guest access requirements. We'll talk about guest versus external access later in the course. And you can see some of the add-on licenses available for business voice, audio conferencing. Do we need toll-free numbers? We've got different phone system options and calling plans. Do you want to equip Teams rooms? These are some of the licensing options available to you. There are various ways to push out Teams clients. Of course, there's clients for Windows, but also Mac and Linux OSs. We can even use a virtualized desktop infrastructure to push out clients. For mobile, there's support for both Android and iOS devices, and people can use a Teams web client. For updates, Teams clients are updated automatically, and unless you're using a VDI per machine installation, in which case automatic updates are disabled. There are a variety of built-in usage reports, which we can analyze from the Teams Admin Center under Analytics and Reports. You need to be a global admin, a Teams admin, or a Skype for Business admin to access the usage reports. Things like how are people using Teams? What devices? What's their daily and monthly average usage? What about PSTN reports? And we can go back a week, a month, or a quarter and analyze data. There are M365 usage reports as well. This gives us a more global view of our M365 usage. And again, you need to be a global admin, or in this case, reports reader role is fine, or product-specific admin roles, for example, for Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. There are Teams reports pertaining to user activity and the devices that users are using to interact with Teams. Again, going back a week, a month, a quarter, or 2 quarters. There's a productivity score, so we've got equal weighting for various elements like communication, meetings, and teamwork. Also, endpoint analytics, network connectivity, and the M365 app's health factor in, so the maximum productivity score is 800. You can drill down into the individual elements of those productivity scores as well. Lastly, for Module 1, let's talk lifecycle management and governance for Microsoft Teams. So we always need to think of 3 phases, like in a play. We've got a beginning, a middle, and an end, which means we're going to delete some teams. We don't want to have a pack rat mentality where we keep things around just in case. No, it's good to delete teams at the end of their usable life. For example, the 3 months after a project completes. Some elements to consider. What happens to guests? Our SharePoint documents. Do we archive them? Do we delete them? We might have some Power Automate flows or Power BI. Elements to consider. We want to automate throughout the life cycle. So let's say we're a construction company and we typically start 10 projects a year, average duration 2 years. Well, do we really need to keep the content from that project around? Maybe not. So after 3 years after the project completes, we could archive SharePoint document content, for example, still make it available, but in a read-only basis. So what are some activities involved in Teams? Well, certainly creating a team, adding owners and members, channels, apps. So again, we have to figure out when we're going to remove channels or apps, whether we need to archive teams at all or simply delete them X days after, let's say, a project completes. A lot of critical decisions get made around Teams that have nothing to do with implementation, but more on deciding governance approaches. Some other considerations to think about. Who gets to create groups and teams? Do you want to have a naming convention? Perhaps you want the first 3 letters of a project or city name involved in the name of a group or a team. We can have prefixes, suffixes. We can have restricted words as part of our naming convention. We may require classification, maybe based on sensitivity. We have to decide about guest access. And then, like we looked at the last slide, should teams expire? How long do we retain content for? Do you want to archive it? Who gets to manage group and team membership? Which features should be enabled for given teams? And then overall security and compliance concerns as well. Here are some questions to think about. Who gets to create shared libraries and groups? Expiry dates. How long should group live and what should happen after the group end of life? We'll get into e-discovery and data loss prevention a little later. We could have templates for teams. Now, not all of the properties of teams can be templatized, but if we're going to need the same characteristics, for example, for each project team that we create, it makes sense to create a template, either from scratch or by copying and then modifying an existing template. So it just streamlines the process and makes sure we have the required elements each time we spin up a new team for a project, for example. We can monitor from the Teams Admin Center or SharePoint or M365 admin centers as well, generate reports. All these are governance considerations. To create a new Microsoft 365 group, we can do this from the M365 Admin Center. The PowerShell commandlet to use is new unified group. By the way, every PowerShell commandlet has its own page on docs.microsoft.com with plenty of examples, all the parameters listed, and it make it easy to copy from that page and then modify for your purposes. You definitely don't want to have group proliferation in M365. It's recommended you create a special group whose members are the only ones that are allowed to create Microsoft 365 group. The syntax on the bottom left of the screen shows how to do that. So we're going to prevent M365 group creation for all groups except for a specific group that we specify. It's good to set up an expiration policy. Now, like many things Microsoft, even when the group gets deleted, it's a 30-day soft delete. So if you change your mind or someone made a mistake and you do need to reanimate that M365 group, no problem. You have 30 days to do so. Also smart to take advantage of notifications to group owners. So a month, a couple weeks, a day before a group is set to expire, a group owner will get an email. So it reminds the group owner, oh yeah, the group's going to expire, we might want to extend it. Now what happens if there's an orphaned group? Maybe the group had a couple of owners in the beginning, but those group owners have moved on. Well, you can specify an email address for someone to receive notifications for those orphaned groups so that person can act on behalf of the group and extend the group lifetime if necessary. Keep in mind when a group expires, all of the group's associated services like the group mailbox, Microsoft Planner, and the SharePoint site also get deleted. You do need the Azure AD Premium P1 or P2 subscription level to take advantage of group expiration. Here's where we can set up a naming policy. You can choose a specific prefix and or suffix. You can specify blocked words. And you can do this using the Admin Center, which is the easiest way. You can use PowerShell as well. Set up a naming policy. You do need Azure AD Premium for this as well. Accessed reviews. Do the right people have access to the right resources? Always a concern. We always want to give just enough rights and permissions for users and services to do their job and nothing more. Well, how do you know if you don't do periodic reviews? So you can set up workflows, say twice a year or once a year, and you can specify, does the owner have to justify the continued presence of the members of that group? Or you can flip it around a bit and have the members of the group themselves justify their continued presence in the group. And you could have workflow actions take place automatically. For example, if the owner doesn't respond within 3 days of the review period starting, then that person's manager gets to decide. Or maybe no action gets taken if there's no response given. Or you could remove everyone from the group if there's no response. You have some flexibility there. This is another Azure AD Premium feature. Policy assignment. There's different ways to assign policies. We always want to use the largest group possible. So sometimes you need to assign a policy or a policy package, in other words, a group of policies, to a single user. Other times it makes more sense to assign to multiple users, or even easier to assign to an entire group. And you can see some of the PowerShell syntax there. For example, grant CS user policy package. Also, grant CS group policy package assignment when we're assigning a policy or package to a group. We want to eliminate the manual repetition of stepping through a wizard-like interface or clicking sliders in the Teams Admin Center. No, much easier to assign a policy that has all those settings encapsulated within the policy. The order of inheritance, if you will, or the precedence order, if there's a policy assigned to an individual user, that takes precedence. From there, we would have groups, and if there are multiple policies, whatever group is listed first would take precedence over groups listed later on. Finally, everyone would be subject to an organization-wide policy. So if you don't have any user or group policies, then the org-wide policy is the only policy in effect. You can have up to 5 organization-wide policies per tenant. Policy package, again, a collection of predefined policies and policy settings, so it's easier to assign multiple policies at once. And we can do this again to a single user, multiple users, or a group. Now, Microsoft made some predefined packages available for education, for healthcare, for retail, for banking. So you can choose from among those packages or create your own for ease of policy assignment. You may or may not be interested in being on the leading edge of Teams update policies, and you may choose to participate in the public preview process. If not, you don't have to. You won't get access to the newest features in Teams. Some organizations prefer that. They prefer the stability of a consistent build they prefer that over the fear of missing out on the latest features. They'll get the latest features eventually, just not as soon as some other organizations. Different organizations have different appetites for getting preview features. Some organizations participate in the Windows Insider or Office Insider programs, for example. Same kind of idea here. Do you want your users to be more on the leading edge and looking at preview features before they're generally available? Or are you more comfortable just waiting for the general availability release of new Teams features? Your choice. And the commandlet to assign a custom update policy, which could be to certain users, not your entire team necessarily, is the set CS Teams update management policy commandlet. You can also assign this policy, as you can see in the screenshot, from the Teams Admin Center. There are team templates we can use. So every time we're spinning up a team, we don't have to step through the same choices with the risk of making a different selection than we wanted. No, we can templatize deployment for, let's say we have a project team. We always need the same resources. We can do this with templates. Now, not all properties of a team template are available to templatize at this point, but most of them are, which saves you time and gives you consistency as you spin up new teams, including things like the presence or absence of particular channels, tabs, and apps. We can start tabula rasa or start with an existing template and modify it. We've got some flexibility there. Now, I'll show you how to prepare Teams admin roles and licenses. We'll look at various Teams management tools. I'll show you how to create groups and teams in different ways, and then how to implement some of the lifecycle management and governance choices you'll need to make for Microsoft Teams.
Our first order of business is to assign various Teams roles to different users. To do that, I'll log in as the Microsoft 365 admin. I'll go into my M365 Admin Center. In the navigation pane on the left-hand side, I'll choose Users. And Active Users. Looking for Joni Sherman. I'll select her username, which will reveal the settings pane on the right-hand side. I'll click Manage Roles and Admin Center Access. I'm going to show all by category and choose Teams Administrator and Save Changes. In a similar way, for Patty Fernandez, I will assign Patty the Teams Device Admin role. And then the Teams Communication role I will assign to Alan DeYoung. Correction, I will assign the Teams Communication Support Engineer role to Alan DeYoung. And save changes. Now check the license assignment of Alex Wilbur. Very important to get the correct country for license assignment. So I'll go into Alex's License and Assignments tab. Correction, I'll go into Alex's Licenses and Apps tab and then choose Canada as the location and save changes. And we can see that Alex is licensed for the EMS E5 and O365 E5 licenses. And we can see that Microsoft Teams is among the other apps licensed as well. So now we're ready to work with Teams. I'll open a private browser and sign in to the Teams Admin Center as Joni Sherman. From the left navigation, under Teams, I'll choose Manage Teams. Shows the teams in our organization. Right now there's an early adopters team, and that's it. Next up is Teams Policies. We can see a global org-wide default team. We'll be exploring the other settings as we go through the demos today and tomorrow. Now I'll install and explore the Teams PowerShell module. Running as admin. Make the font bigger here for legibility. So to take advantage of the Microsoft Teams commandlet, first I need to install the Teams PowerShell module. I do that with the install module commandlet, specifying the name of Microsoft Teams. And I'll say yes to acknowledge the untrusted repository. And NuGet provider. Now I'll connect into my Teams tenant with the Connect Microsoft Teams commandlet. I'll authenticate as Joni Sherman. And now we see some info about the signed in user and the tenant. Next up, we'll explore the Microsoft Teams PowerShell module. We'll run the get module command. This should return a list of modules, and it does. We can see the version number of the PowerShell modules on the left-hand side. Let's get an overview of the available Teams PowerShell commandlets. We'll run the get command, specifying the Microsoft Teams module. So again, we've installed correctly. Let's say we want information about how to create a team with PowerShell. For that, we'll use get help with the new team commandlets. And we'll update the libraries. To get the most current help files. And now several examples appear about the new team commandlet. Also some links and other remarks. Now we'll disconnect from our team session. Now let's create some groups in Teams, starting with a Microsoft 365 group. To do that, from the Admin Center, we'll go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Under Teams and Groups, we'll choose Active Teams and Groups. And step through the Add a Group wizard. We'll use a Microsoft 365 group as the default. And the name will be IT Department. We'll include all staff of the IT department. Then we'll assign owners. Joni Sherman will be the owner. Click on Add One and Next. Now we need some members. We'll include Alan, the administrator, MOD administrator, and Patty Fernandez. Add 3 and Next. Group email address will be IT department. Make this a private group. And we won't create a team for this group right now. And next, create group and close. And we can see there's no Teams icon related to the IT department. We'll go into the IT department group to review settings and members. Now let's create a new team using the desktop client. We'll sign in as Alex Wilbur. And we'll sign into this app only instead of allowing the organization to manage my device. And I'll choose Teams. And from the bottom left, join or create a team. Create team from scratch. This will be a public team. And we'll call it Teams Rollout. And create. The team needs some members, so we'll add the usual suspects: Joni Sherman, Lynn Robbins, and this time also Diego Siciliani. And we'll make Joni an owner of the new team. Next up, we will create a new team using the web client. Well, signed in as Lynn Robbins. We'll use the web app instead of downloading the app and choose Join or Create a Team from the lower left. Now we'll create team from scratch. It'll be a private team with the name of Sales. And we'll add a member named Alex Wilbur. Now that we've created teams several ways, let's implement lifecycle management and governance for Microsoft Teams. To do this, we'll go to the Azure Active Directory portal and sign in as the MOD administrator. And from the left nav, we'll choose Azure Active Directory and Groups and Expiration. From the left nav pane, from the left nav pane, we'll choose Azure Active Directory, Groups, and Expiration. Give it a lifetime of 14 days. And we'll specify an email contact for groups with no owners. This will be Joni Sherman yet again. We'll say only selected groups will be enabled for expiration. We'll choose Teams Rollout and save. And save one more time on the group's expiration page. Now we've configured a new expiration policy for Teams Rollout. If the team doesn't have an owner, after 90 days, Joni Sherman will get notified about the expiration. Let's create a group creation policy now. So from the M365 Admin Center, we'll go into Teams and Groups, Active Teams and Groups, and add a group. It'll be a security group. Give it a name of Group Creator. And this is for users who can create M365 groups for new teams. And next, we'll click Create Group and then Close. From the Security tab, we'll choose that newly created group and choose Members. Now we can configure owners and members. The owner will be the MOD administrator. And the members, Joni Sherman and Alex Wilbur. Now we want to restrict the creation of Microsoft 365 groups to the security group just created. We'll do this from within PowerShell. So we'll install the Azure AD Preview module. Select Yes to acknowledge the untrusted repository. Now we'll connect to our Azure AD tenant. As the MOD administrator account. Then we'll load the Azure AD Unified Group template. Now we'll check if an Azure AD setting is already existing and load it if yes. If not, we'll create a blank Azure AD setting object and we'll populate the settings variable. Now we'll modify the group creation setting for our tenant with the Enable Group Creation attribute. Now we'll add the just created security group creators as a permitted group to create groups using their object ID of the group creators group. Now we'll review the changes just configured. You can see the group creation allowed group ID listed there. And we'll save the changes and apply the setting. Now we'll test the newly configured settings. Signed in as Alex Wilbur from the Teams desktop client. So we can see a constrained set of choices there for Alex Wilbur from the desktop client. And now we'll revert the change for enabling users to create new teams by first loading the Azure AD Unified Group template, creating a blank Azure AD tenant settings object, and then applying the configured settings to revert previous changes. Then we'll disconnect the current session using the disconnect Azure AD commandlet. So we've successfully created a new security group and configured Azure AD settings to restrict the creation of new groups to members of one group only. And we tested the new group creation restrictions. Now we'll configure a new naming policy. So we're back into the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. Under Azure Active Directory, we'll choose Groups, then Naming Policy, and we're going to configure blocked words. We'll download a sample file and open that blockedwords.csv sample file with Notepad. We're going to enter a few items here: CEO, payroll, and HR. Save that and then upload the CSV file by choosing the Select a File box. And we'll click Save. Now we'll configure the group naming policy. So we'll specify both a prefix and a suffix, starting with a prefix. It'll be a string type. And we'll enter group underscore. Now we'll add country region as a suffix. Type string. And now an attribute, country or region, and save. So now we've configured a naming policy to block specific words when creating M365 groups, and also a new naming policy. Now we'll test out the naming policy from the Teams desktop client. From scratch, public, give a team a name of After Work. May have to wait a few minutes for the naming convention to kick in. And we can see now the name After Work with the prefix and suffixes that we specified. Also see this on the left-hand side. Teams listing. Now we'll delete the naming policy. That concludes this demo.
In Module 1, we explored the Microsoft Teams Admin Center and PowerShell as part of planning and deploying Microsoft Teams and examined Teams lifecycle management and governance. We'll now take a 10-minute break. See everyone back here when we start Module 2 and learn about preparing the environment for a Microsoft Teams deployment. Welcome back. We're now going to discuss considerations for granting access to external users, security and compliance requirements, and planning and configuring network settings. Because you need to know if your existing network can support your expected Teams workloads. Let's get started. Let's prepare the environment for a Microsoft Teams deployment. Starting with managing access for external users. Azure Active Directory is an identity provider, like Active Directory Domain Services is. How they go about their business is completely different. We're not going to get into those distinctions, but we'll talk about some of the features in Azure AD. In other words, the services it provides, for example, authentication. So we offer services like self-service password reset and multi-factor authentication. There are business-to-business capabilities, so we can manage our guests and external partners while maintaining control over our own corporate data. There is business-to-customer capability as well, so we can customize and control how users sign up, sign in, and manage their profiles when using our apps, leveraging third-party identity providers like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and even Google and Microsoft accounts. Conditional access lets us manage access to our cloud apps. More on that coming up. Device management lets us manage how our cloud or on-premises devices access our corporate data. With hybrid identity, we can use Azure AD Connect and Azure AD Connect Health to provide a single user identity for authentication and authorization to all resources, regardless of location, either cloud or on-prem. Identity protection lets us detect potential vulnerabilities affecting our organization's identities, configure policies to respond to suspicious actions, and then take appropriate action to resolve them. With managed identities for Azure resources, this provides our Azure services with an automatically managed identity in Azure AD that can authenticate any Azure AD supported authentication service, including Azure Key Vault. Privileged identity management lets us manage, control, and monitor access within our organization, including access to resources in Azure AD and Azure and other Microsoft online services like Microsoft 365 and Intune. With reports and monitoring, we gain insights into the security and usage patterns in our environment. We can work with external users in Microsoft Teams. Now, these users can be in different categories. So user A is inside our organization. User B is authenticating using another Azure AD account associated with a Fabricam organization. So perhaps Contoso and Fabricam have partnered up on a project. Each company is responsible for authenticating their own users, yet a token issued by the partner organization is valid, a valid way of authenticating a user for resource access in our network. User C, we've got a consumer email account, so this could be a Gmail or Microsoft account, Outlook.com, Hotmail. User D is an anonymous user, so sometimes we want to give access to our resources without requiring any authentication. So this covers the different user populations that we may need to access our resources. There's a key distinction between guest and external access. Guest access is for individual users, whereas if we want to grant access to multiple people in a different organization, like Fabricam, for example, That's external access. We can list the domain as a trusted domain once, as opposed to worrying about individually providing guest access to users in Fabricam. Guests are added to your organization's Azure AD as a B2B user and must sign into Teams using their guest account, which means they may have to first sign out of their own organization to sign into your organization. So in this diagram, a Fabricam user would have to sign out of their organization in order to sign as a guest to the Contosa organization. There are several different admin centers you'll need to visit to configure the correct guest user access. For the Azure AD Admin Center, we use that to enable guest self-service sign-up. We can establish collaboration restrictions and other guest invite settings. Through the M365 Admin Center, here's where we can let users add new guests to the organization. We can even allow group owners to add people outside the organization to groups. In the Teams Admin Center, here's where we can provide external access, so specifying specific domains that have access. Also other guest access settings around calling, meetings, and messaging. We'll look at some of those options coming up. And what the meetings experience is, if any, for anonymous users. The SharePoint Admin Center is where we can set up external sharing of documents and also file and folder links for sharing. Let's turn our attention to external collaboration settings in Azure AD. Under guest user access restrictions, you have a few choices. Either guest users have the same access as members, this is the most inclusive setting, or guest users have limited access to properties and memberships of directory objects. This is the default. So this blocks guests from certain directory tasks. Number 3 option is guest user access is restricted to properties and memberships of their own directory objects. This is the most restrictive option. With this setting, guests can access only their own profiles. Guests cannot see other users' profiles, groups, or group memberships. The next section pertains to guest invite settings. The most inclusive setting here is anyone in the organization can invite guest users, including guests and non-admins. Another option is member users and users assigned to specific admin roles can invite guest users. Third option is only users assigned to specific admin roles can invite guest users. And the most restrictive option is no one in the organization can invite guest users, including admins. Under Enable Guest Self-Service, sign up via user flows. Select yes if you want users to sign up that way to use apps. And under Collaboration Restrictions, you can choose whether to allow or deny invitations to specific domains. If you're going to allow or deny to more than one domain, enter each domain on a new line. Let's talk managing external access in Teams. You've got some choices. Do you want to have users communicate with other Skype for Business and Teams users and or communicating with other Skype users? And you can have open federation, or you can allow or block specific domains, whichever is the most efficient way to go. Managing guest access in Microsoft Teams. We've got all kinds of slider options here, including, do we want to allow phone calls to guest users? Do we want to allow IP video? Do we want to allow screen sharing and the Meet Now option with guest users? Should guests be able to edit or delete their sent messages? Should guests be allowed to chat? Should they be able to use Jiffies or memes or stickers? To manage file sharing in SharePoint and OneDrive, we use the SharePoint Admin Center. Now, these two sliders may look independent, but they're not. So when you move the SharePoint slider, for example, the OneDrive slider eventually moves along with it. Your choices range from the most permissive on top to the most restrictive on the bottom. So the most permissive levels for SharePoint and OneDrive, anyone. So users can share files and folders using links that do not require sign-in. The most restrictive option is no external sharing allowed. Only people in your organization can access the content. And there are some middle options for either new and existing guests or existing guests only. Some other options at the bottom there. You could limit external sharing by domain. In other words, sharing only with certain domains would be allowed. Or you must be a member of one or more security groups to be allowed to share externally. Further, do you want to require guests use the same account that the sharing invitation was sent to access the shared content? Can guests share items they don't own? Another checkbox there. And then, how long should the invitation link last before expiry? Default is 60 days. Next up is implementing security for Microsoft Teams. It's a great idea to use conditional access. You may be familiar with the Zero Trust framework, which is assuming breach. The old security perimeter was the firewall where our resources were inside. Now, with most users having multiple devices, identity becomes the new perimeter. So we need to take advantage of conditional access to make sure we've got the best defense against malicious users. Microsoft processes 8 trillion signals a day. What are some of the signals? Well, they pertain to user behavior and the locations the users are at, or where sign-in attempts were noticed. What device is the user using? What applications are they running on their device? And what applications are they attempting to access? What's the real-time risk? All these signals are processed, and either access is allowed, or perhaps an MFA challenge is issued to the user. So normally they didn't need to use MFA to access a resource. Now they're being asked to use a secondary form of authentication. It could be using the Authenticator app, or a text to their phone, or a voice call to their phone. We could restrict access or the kind of access. In other words, maybe due to real-time risk, now I only have read access to some files which normally I would have read and write access to. I might be issued with a password reset challenge. Maybe my access is monitored. So we have a lot of conditions we could use to decide whether to grant access to a resource, and if so, what kind of access to grant. There are a couple of policy enforcement options here: early bound and late bound policy enforcement. So early bound means a user must satisfy the dependent service policy before accessing the calling app. For example, a user must satisfy SharePoint policy before signing into Microsoft Teams. By contrast, late bound policy enforcement occurs after the user signs into the calling app. Enforcement is deferred to when the calling app requests a token for the downstream service. So, example here, Microsoft Teams accessing Planner and Office.com accessing SharePoint. As a best practice, you should set common policies across related apps and services whenever possible. Having a consistent security posture provides you with the best user experience. For example, setting a common policy across Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams, and Skype for Business significantly reduces unexpected prompts that may arise from different policies being applied to downstream services. On the left-hand side of this slide, we have various multi-factor authentication types: FIDO2 security keys, biometrics, tokens can also be used as additional forms of authentication. Safe attachments you might be familiar with from Exchange. It's been around for a while. The idea here is that we can examine attachments in a safe environment such that if they're found to be malicious, no harm is done to the user's device. It's a simple slider in M365 Defender to enable safe attachments. If a file is deemed to be malicious, and let's say in SharePoint or OneDrive, you can see it is classified that way by the red shield next to the file name, as shown on the upper right of the slide. Safe links for Microsoft Teams, the same idea as safe attachments, but applied to web pages now. So in this way, we take advantage of real-time URL scanning and we can save users from clicking through to malicious websites. Again, in a safe environment, that URL is explored. If it's deemed to be malicious, then the user gets a warning. Now, depending on the settings you configure, you may allow the user to click through to the URL or prevent access from certain populations. Maybe your security administrator does get to click through to explore that malicious website. We can apply a safe links policy using the commandlet new safe links policy or using the portal. We have various security reports we can monitor for Microsoft Teams around categories like identities, data, devices, and apps. We can also get reports on our threat protection status and the Threat Explorer. Let's talk compliance for Teams now. So we can come up with our own classification structure to protect organizational data and then apply these labels or even require these labels for different kinds of content like files and emails, groups and sites. And again, they're not built in, so we come up with them. So maybe classified, confidential, PII, non-PII. These are some examples of sensitivity labels you can create. And then you can auto-classify data or have users manually classify content. We can use sensitivity label settings for various groups and sites pertaining to external sharing or access from unmanaged devices. So we can use sensitivity labels as a way to restrict access to certain kinds of information only to organization-issued devices, for example. Retention policies. How long do we want to retain content? It's not one policy fits all. We can get very specific. If you look at the total of Microsoft 365 content or other data we've ingested in our Microsoft 365 environment, we can apply the policy just to Exchange public folders or Teams channels, for example, or SharePoint repositories. We've got various retention policy options. Maybe we want to retain the content for a certain period of time. Best to delete it after a certain period of time, but you have a choice there. And different kinds of content we can treat differently with different retention policies. What if we have multiple policies applying to the same content? What is the tiebreaker? Which policy will win out? Well, retention always wins over deletion, and if there's still a conflict in policies, the longest retention period wins. If we have explicit inclusions, they win out. And lastly, the shortest deletion period wins. These principles are only applied in order in case of policy conflicts. Data loss prevention is all about pattern matching. So Microsoft has dozens of built-in patterns pertaining to credit card numbers, passport numbers, social security, driver's license, banking information, routing numbers, and we can create our own custom policies as well, such that when a match is discovered, let's say in an email or an attachment we're attempting to email or share outside the organization, we can be prevented from doing so. Now, depending on the settings, you can allow for the marking of a false positive, and then the user can override the pattern match or not. And we can have policy tips as well. So let's say I'm booking travel and I've pasted in my credit card number into the body of the email. Before I even think of hitting send, I can have a tooltip appear and it tells me, oh, this credit card's detected, that violates DLP policy. And then if the policy is set up this way, I could do an override or not. I'd have to get that credit card number to a travel agency, for example, a different way. Communication compliance policies can assist with reviewing messages in your organization in several important compliance areas. Corporate policies. This is where users must comply with acceptable use, ethical standards, and other corporate policies in all business-related communications. Communication compliance policies detect policy matches and help you take corrective actions to help mitigate these types of incidents. For example, you could scan user communications in your organization for potential HR concerns like harassment or the use of inappropriate or offensive language. Risk management. Organizations are responsible to all communications distributed throughout their infrastructure and corporate network systems. Using communication compliance policies to help identify and manage potential legal exposure and risk can help minimize risks before they can damage corporate operations. For example, you could scan messages for unauthorized communications and conflicts of interest about confidential projects such as upcoming acquisitions, mergers, earnings disclosures, reorganizations, or leadership team changes. In terms of regulatory compliance, most organizations must comply with some type of regulatory compliance standards as part of their normal operating procedures. These regulations often require organizations to implement some type of supervisory or oversight process for messaging that is appropriate for their industry. The FINRA Rule 3110 is a good example of a requirement for organizations to have a supervisory procedure in place to scan user communications and the types of businesses in which it engages. Another example may be a need to review broker-dealer communications in your organization to safeguard against potential money laundering, insider trading, collusion, or bribery activities. Communication compliance policies help your organization meet these requirements by providing a process to both scan and report on corporate communications. With scoped directory search, you can create virtual boundaries. You can prevent different user populations from communicating with each other. The classic example here is a Wall Street brokerage house where you've got your sales side who is not supposed to be communicating with the research division. So you can prevent all electronic communication within Microsoft's world. In other words, if I'm on the sales side and you're on the research side, I cannot add you to a team. I cannot start a chat message. I cannot send you an email or initiate a phone call from within Teams. This is known as an information barrier policy. And once we've got the scope directory, we've subdivided the number of users into different categories, then we can assign information barrier policies to prevent such communication. So first step is to segment users in the organization and then define those information barrier policies and apply them. Each policy is one way only. Notice how in this example, HR can communicate with the investment banker segment and the financial advisor segment, but the investment bankers cannot communicate with the financial advisors. Sometimes we're asked to do e-discovery. Maybe the courts have asked us to produce all communication between person A and person B in a 1-week time frame. So we can do this. We can search across some or all of our M365 corpus looking for the appropriate communications between person A and person B. There are different roles involved in e-discovery. As you can imagine, if someone has access to all the resources across M365, we can't just have anyone do that, so we get to specify certain roles. There's also someone, a case manager, that needs to access and coordinate potentially multiple cases ongoing. In fact, the same document or email could be of interest to more than one case. So all that is manageable within e-discovery in M365, including, as you'd expect, all Teams content. Sometimes, besides regular Teams recording, we need to set up compliance recording for WFE, that's workforce engagement, or for security and surveillance, or other compliance and regulatory obligations. The compliance recording solution in Teams enables organizations to automatically record and capture calls and online meetings for later processing and retention. The core component of the compliance recording solution is the recorder. When a communication interaction takes place, the recorders are automatically invited to participate in conversations based on the policies. Users under this policy are aware that their digital interactions with Teams are being recorded, and users cannot disable the recording, and they do not have access to the recording once the interaction is complete. The recording becomes part of the organizational archive and is available to compliance and legal personnel for e-discovery, legal hold, and other corporate retention uses. The exact implementation of the recorder service will vary by provider. We may want to be alerted when security or compliance issues arise and we have alert policies for this. It could be indicating a security breach, some kind of misuse or attempted misuse of administrative privileges, or other activities that require monitoring. Now, we can see here several tasks that we perform, or a couple anyway. Admin tasks, for example, we would create, configure, and turn on an alert policy. And then users are just going about their daily business. And when they do something that matches the conditions of an alert policy, then Office 365 kicks in, generates an alert, and sends an email. The alerts are visible in the Security and Compliance Center, and that's where admins can view and manage those alerts. Optionally, they could be emailed about an action that triggered the alert. Lastly, let's look at planning and configuring network settings for Microsoft Teams. Different kinds of traffic we need to be aware of: data traffic, peer-to-peer real-time traffic, chats, for example, and then conferencing real-time traffic. We need to make sure we have connectivity to Microsoft 365 with minimal hops. So we want to remove VPNs, proxy servers. We must have enough available bandwidth to support the Teams workload we anticipate. And you can see some of the network optimization requirements on the right-hand side. We might need to increase our NAT pool size. We want to disable intrusion detection and intrusion protection devices. We may need to configure split tunnel VPN, so again, no VPN to Microsoft 365. Quality of service. Some traffic should be prioritized. We'll have a slide coming up on that shortly. We might need to upgrade our networking equipment, including Wi-Fi routers, and we definitely want to bypass proxy servers. Depending on the video quality we require and the use cases for Teams, we have various personas we can use to help estimate our needed bandwidth requirements. So audio settings, you can see there columns for minimum recommended and best performance. These are bandwidth requirements, so bit rates in kilobytes up and down. Video, one-to-one or meetings. Do we need screen sharing? Are we going to use together mode? So you can see there some minimum recommended and best performance indicators for those different workloads. Thankfully, there's a tool called Network Planner we can use, and we have several personas. So we have to guesstimate based on, let's say, what a salesperson does throughout the day versus an administrative assistant, and then we can come up with some kind of estimate. From that, we may realize, oh, at this location, we need to update our bandwidth, or maybe segment our populations a little differently. Settings we need to enable per persona relate to audio, video, and screen sharing. Is file sharing required? Are we going to need conference audio or conference video and screen sharing? Do we need PSTN access? All these choices affect our total bandwidth usage. There are various ports and protocols that need to be configured as well. Most organizations already have ports 80 and 443 open. There are 60 ports required for real-time media traffic. We're looking at the defaults there from 50,000 to 50,059 inclusive. We can change those port ranges if need be, but they must be back to back to back. Here's the quality of service. So we're going to prioritize real-time traffic, whether it's audio, video, screen sharing. Other kinds of traffic, therefore, is deprioritized because let's say we're sending a Word document. We can always, the Word document does get arranged in correct order even if the packets arrived out of order. Whereas if video or audio packets arrive out of order, that's going to be suboptimal and lead to confusion. So all your networking equipment must support quality of service. So if you need to upgrade your networking equipment, you have to decide whether that's worth it to you. And we can implement quality of service in the Teams Admin Center. Think of it like quality of service like HOV lanes, but for your network traffic. There is a tool we can use to assess network readiness. So it's an external website we connect to, connectivity to office.com, and then for our various locations we can see if the network connectivity is good to go, measuring things like packet loss, latency, and jitter. less is better for all three of those items. And then we can share those connectivity test results as well. And this gives us a per location report on our network readiness. There is a connectivity dashboard we can use and again view different cities and different reports. There's a network assessment ranging from 0 to 100, 100 being the best, 80 meets recommendations, even 60 is acceptable. When you get down to 40, then users are definitely going to experience issues. Now I'll show you how to prepare the environment for a Microsoft Teams deployment, including managing guest access, implementing security and compliance, and calculating network capabilities.
Let's review guest access settings from the Azure AD Admin Center. We'll go under Users, User Settings, and then Manage External Collaboration Settings. So we'll see for guest user access, guest users have limited access to properties and memberships of directory objects. The guest invite settings, anyone in the organization can invite guest users, including guests and non-admins. That's the most inclusive setting. And for collaboration restrictions, we can allow invitations to be sent to any domain. That's the most inclusive option. Now we'll go to the M365 Admin Center. Under Settings, Org Settings, we'll choose M365 Groups under the Services tab. And confirming that the checkbox for Let Group Owner Add People Outside Your Organization to M365 Groups is selected. Under the Security and Privacy tab, we'll choose Sharing. Again, we're confirming that Let Users Add New Guests to the Organization is selected. So we've reviewed guest access settings across different admin centers. Now let's invite guests for collaboration. We'll go to the Teams Admin Center, signed in as Joni Sherman. And under Users, we'll choose Guest Access. Confirming that Allow Guest Access in Teams is set to On. Scroll down to the Messaging section, and we will disable Sent Messages. And choose Save at the bottom. Next, we'll add a guest to a team. The Group Afterwork United States team created in the previous demo. Signed in as Alex Wilbur. We will add a member. I set up a Teams demo account for this purpose. And add. Now I'll need to accept the guest invite from my email. And I've chosen Accept to sign into the Teams web client with my Outlook account. And I can see the Afterwork team created earlier. I'll test by sending a message in the general channel. And if I now try and delete the message, I'll see there's no delete option for that message. So now we've successfully invited a guest to the team and validated the guest access setting from the previous task. Let's set up access reviews now. I will go to the Azure AD Admin Center. Signed in as the MOD administrator. I'll create an access review to monitor guest users. Click on All Services and Identity Governance. Create an access review. I'll be reviewing teams and groups. All the M365 groups with guest users and I'm reviewing guest users only. On the Reviews tab, the reviewers will be group owners. We'll do a weekly review. And just leave the defaults here. Review and create and create. Now we'll review the Access Review dashboard from Azure AD. Clicking on Review Guest Access across M365 groups. After a few minutes, the status will be active. And I'll select the group name. And we see one user showed as not reviewed. So I can review the access review and approve the guest user. Now I'll browse to Outlook.com as Alex Wilbur. Click Review Guest Access and approve. And click Submit. So we successfully created an access review and approved a guest user in the tenant. Next up is implementing security for Microsoft Teams, starting with safe attachments. So go to the Defender portal at security.microsoft.com. Sign in as MOD admin. Under Policies and Rules, Threat Policies, Safe Attachments, Global Settings, there's a toggle here for turn on Defender for O365, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams, and save. So we've activated Safe Attachment Scanning. Next up is implementing compliance for Microsoft Teams. So we'll go into PowerShell as an admin and run the connect Azure AD commandlet to connect into our tenant. We'll fetch the current group settings for the Azure AD organization. Then enable the Microsoft Identity Protection support in the configuration. Now we'll verify the new configuration. That's good. And now we will save the changes and apply the settings. Finally, we'll disconnect from our tenant. Next up is creating sensitivity labels for Teams. We'll do this from the Compliance Center, compliance.microsoft.com. Signed in as MOD admin. We'll go to Information Protection in the left nav and turn on to activate content processing in Office Online files. Now we'll create the first sensitivity label called General. With the same display name. Description will be general information without protection. That's the user description. There's also an admin description as well, mentioning there's no encryption, marking, or sharing restriction settings activated. The scope will be files and emails and groups and sites. We'll leave default settings here, so no encryption or marking. Leave auto labeling off. We will choose privacy and external user access settings and external sharing and conditional access settings. We'll allow for external access. We're going to do a second sensitivity label now for internal. I jumped the gun there. The label is created. And now creating a second sensitivity label for internal. User description is internal information with sharing protection. And the admin description, internal information with moderate encryption, marking, and sharing restriction settings activated. Again, we'll keep it at files and emails, groups and sites as the label scope. This time we will choose the encrypt files and emails and mark the content of files checkboxes. We'll configure encryption settings. We'll assign permissions now. And the expiration is never, offline access always. And we'll assign permissions and we'll choose all users and groups in the organization. For content marking, we'll say yes, and also add a watermark. And add watermark text of internal use only. We'll keep the auto labeling sections as default. In other words, off, and we'll choose both privacy and external user access settings and external sharing and conditional access settings. Here we'll choose none for privacy and external user access settings. And for external sharing and device access settings, we'll choose control internal sharing from labeled SharePoint sites for existing guests and use Azure AD conditional access to protect labeled SharePoint sites and allow limited web-only access. Create label and done. Now a second sensitivity label. Now we'll create a second sensitivity label of confidential. User description is confidential information with all protection. The admin description, confidential information with all restrictive encryption, marking, and sharing settings activated. Scope, again, files and emails, groups and sites. We'll choose to encrypt files and emails and mark content of files. We'll configure encryption settings. We'll assign permissions now. Content access expiration is never. Offline access, never. And we'll assign permissions, adding all users and groups in the organization. For content marking, again, we'll choose add a watermark. Text will be confidential. No auto labeling. We'll select privacy and external user access settings and external sharing and conditional access settings. Choose private here for the privacy and external user access settings. And we'll control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites for only people in our organization, and use Azure AD conditional access to protect labeled SharePoint sites. Block access. Create label and done. Now we'll need to publish labels from the top menu. We'll choose sensitivity labels to publish and choose them all and add. Keep the default settings here for users and groups and also for policy settings. For documents, we will choose apply this label by default to documents general. Similarly, for emails, general will be the default for emails. Also for sites and groups. And Power BI content. The name will be All Company Sensitivity Labels. Now we'll create a new retention policy to retain content. So we'll go to the M365 Compliance Center, sign in as MOD admin. From left nav, we'll choose policies, and then under data, choose retention and new retention policy. We'll call it the sales retention policy. We're going to retain messages for 7 years. And various settings for locations, all off except for Teams channel messages. Step through the wizard. And done. Now we'll create a new retention policy to delete content. So policies, we'll choose retention and new retention policy. This is a Teams rollout deletion policy. This is a retention policy for the Teams rollout team to delete messages older than 1 day. Again, applying only to Teams channel messages. So for Teams rollout, hit next, and we're going to delete items when they reach a certain age. Custom, that will be 1 day. Based on when the item was created. Now we've created a second retention policy for testing the deletion capabilities to clean up the Teams rollout team from all conversation messages older than 1 day. Now we'll create a DLP policy for GDPR, personally identifiable information content, from a template. So we'll go back to the Compliance Center, choose Data Loss Prevention, Policy tabs, create a policy. We're going to search for specific templates using GDPR. Call it GDPR DLP policy. This is a data loss prevention policy for GDPR regulations in Teams. This will apply to Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, Teams chat and channel messages, and Microsoft Cloud App Security. So we're running through a lot of defaults here. Looking for at least one instance of a sensitive info type being shared. We'll specify who should receive the report, and once again it'll be Joni Sherman. We'll select alerts if any of the DLP rules match. And also restrict access or encrypt content in Microsoft locations. We'll block users from accessing shared SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams content. And we're only going to block people outside the organization, so internal users will continue to have access. And then we'll allow for overriding the rule automatically if it's reported as a false positive. We'll turn it on right away, submit, and done. Now we've created a DLP policy from the template GDPR that detects if GDPR sensitive content is shared with people outside the organization. The policy is extra sensitive for the configured threshold of 1 rule match, and Joni Sherman will be notified if matching occurs. Now we'll create a DLP policy from scratch. Again, from data loss prevention, we'll choose create policy, and we'll choose custom. Call this one credit card data DLP policy. This is data loss prevention policy for credit card data in Teams. Again, we'll apply everywhere listed except for on-premises repositories. We'll create rule. This will be credit card numbers found. The basic rule for protecting credit card numbers from being shared in Teams. We'll add conditions. Content contains. We'll add sensitive information types. Choose credit card number. And add. We'll use the high confidence instance count of 1. Underneath action, We'll choose Add an Action and restrict access or encrypt content in M365 locations. And we're going to block everyone. So only the content owner, the last modifier, and the site admin will continue to have access. Under User Notifications, we'll turn the slider on and customize the policy tip text. With credit card numbers are not allowed to be shared. And below Incident Reports, we'll choose the slider to send an alert to admins when a rule match occurs, and then add or remove people. We'll choose Joni again. And save. Save and next. We'll turn on the rule right away. And submit and done. So now we've successfully created a new custom DLP policy for protecting credit card numbers from being shared via Teams conversations.
In Module 2, we discussed different levels of external access as well as security and compliance settings for Microsoft Teams. We also looked at crucial network settings you need to know before deploying Teams. We'll now take a 10-minute break. See everyone back here then when we will finish our Part 1 of the event with Module 3, Manage Chat, Teams, Channels, and Apps in Microsoft Teams. Welcome back from the break. In Module 3, we'll explore several ways of creating and managing teams and different ways we can enable collaboration in Microsoft Teams. Then we'll look at many ways you can extend the capabilities of Teams using apps. Let's get started. And now, managing chat, Teams, channels, and apps in Microsoft Teams. Starting with creating and managing teams. We can create teams from a variety of places. The Teams Admin Center, the Teams Client. If we choose that method, we can create a team from scratch, from a template, or even from an existing group or team. The associated PowerShell commandlet is new team. And for bulk operations, we can use the Microsoft Graph API. I'll be showing you these methods in the demo. We can create a team from an existing resource. No need to start fresh in Teams. If we have an existing distribution list or a Microsoft 365 group, we can turn that into a team. There is an intermediate step. If we're starting from a distribution list, we convert that to a Microsoft 365 group and then to a team using either the M365 Admin Center, Teams Client, or even with PowerShell, starting with the commandlet get unified group. Also, we can convert a SharePoint team site to a team. We have org-wide teams up to 5 maximum per tenant with up to 10,000 users in your organization. And as you'd expect, only global admins can create these org-wide teams because they're so wide-reaching. The members include all active users and the owner of the org-wide team, global admins, and Teams administrators. We can create an org-wide team from an existing team or starting from scratch. Users cannot remove themselves from org-wide teams. However, we do want to eliminate some resource accounts that may have crept into the list of users in an org-wide team. We have that capability. We can manage teams. There's a Teams overview grid, so at a glance we can see a list of all teams, active users, whether the team is archived, whether it's deleted. Remember, we have soft delete, so we can recover within 30 days. And we can search for teams as well. We can edit things like the profile, the team members, settings pertaining to conversations and channels. We can manage the channels. Associated PowerShell commandlets include set team and remove team. Some of the settings around teams pertain to who can add and edit channels, editing and removing tabs, and apps. There are user roles for a team. We have the owner and member and optionally the moderator role. You can see there's a fair amount of overlap between what team owners can do and team members can do. Some key distinctions though, only team owners can create, edit the team name, and delete a team. Also, only owners can add members and delete private channels. Again, we can manage membership from 3 places: Teams Admin Center, Teams Client, and PowerShell. Dynamic membership is a different way to define members in a team. Instead of manually adding or removing members, we define one or more rules to denote membership. For example, the city or the role or the rank or title. We can get as specific as we want, but it's the rules that determine membership. We cannot manually add or remove members if we use dynamic membership. We can use the Admin Center, Azure AD Admin Center, or PowerShell. And again, at least one rule must be defined to populate using dynamic membership. We have the ability to archive a team. We could restore it if need be. We could delete the team permanently. PowerShell commandlet to use is remove team. If we need to restore a deleted team, we would use the restore Azure ADMS deleted directory object commandlet. From PowerShell, we could also permanently delete a team. Let's say we didn't want to wait for the 30 days to elapse. We could simply permanently delete. When we choose the archive option, we can choose to make all SharePoint content read-only at that time. Next up, managing collaboration experiences for chat and channels. There are 2 types of channels, public and private. Private channels are viewable only to channel members, and you can create as many private channels as you want. Sometimes, though, it makes sense to create a separate team rather than just a private channel within a team. Depends on the number of distinct topics you need to discuss. And we can always add new channels, delete channels, even restore a deleted channel. Who gets to create private channels? Well, we can specify this with the Teams Admin Center or with PowerShell using the set CS Teams channel policy commandlet with the allow private channel creation switch set to false. CS refers to communication server, an older name for what turned into Teams. At the team level, we can use the Teams client to manage private channel creation. Configuring team settings, lots of slider options to consider. It's easy to switch the slider, it takes more effort to decide which slider to use for different reasons. Let's discuss. The first one is suggested feeds can appear in a user's activity feed, yes or no. I can make an argument either way. Often the targeting is so good that it distracts me from the work I'm supposed to do. So on the one hand, I like what's being surfaced. On the other hand, it can be a distraction. You have to decide what's best for you. You can allow for tagging and associated @ mentions. You can mention someone by name. Email integration. You could allow emails to be sent to a channel email address, and then it's a rather long email address. You can configure an alias for it so users can simply easily find the email alias for a Teams channel and send an email to it. You may or may not want to enable cloud file storage, and you have options for Citrix, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, and Ignite. You may want to reveal the org chart as a tab. That's a switch there as well. And you could require a secondary form of authentication to access meeting content. This is if you're using Surface Hub devices. More on Surface Hub later in the course. You could require a content pin to make sure that users can only see their own meeting content and not other meeting content. And whether or not you want to allow Surface Hub accounts to send email. There is a search by name option you could enable as well. To create and manage messaging policies, we can assign, modify, or delete policies. The PowerShell commandlets to use are, or include, new CS Teams messaging policy or grant CS Teams messaging policy. Policy choices to make. Can owners delete sent messages? Can users delete or edit their sent messages? Are read receipts enabled? Are you going to enable chat? If so, what about jiffies, memes, stickers? Do you want to reveal URL previews? Do you want message translation? Do you want to enable priority notification for urgent messages? Do you want to enable voice messages? And do you want to enable suggested replies? Also, you have the ability to remove users from group chats. Channel moderation is optional. With channel moderation, you can allow for messages submitted by bots and connectors. Some choices to make. Who gets to start a new post? Everyone or everyone except guests? Some other options there. Can members pin channel messages? Can members reply to channel messages? Next up is managing apps for Microsoft Teams. There are all kinds of Microsoft apps, third-party apps, custom apps you may develop in-house. Relating to the Microsoft Bot Framework, various web technologies like HTML5, the SharePoint Framework, Power Platform, GitHub, Visual Studio, Microsoft Graph. So you can manage apps for your organization in the Admin Center. You have control over app policies. Should users be able to upload custom apps? Are you going to allow Power Platform apps, Power Virtual Agent apps, and org-level app settings as well? You could only allow, for example, apps published by certain publishers, maybe certain versions of apps. This relates to security and compliance as well. Some apps are free, some there is a per-user charge. You could also block specific apps here. You could add apps to individual teams. You could customize them in some way. There are also org-wide app settings, again, whether to allow third-party apps and or custom apps. There are app permission policies you can create and manage from the Teams Admin Center or PowerShell. You have separate choices for Microsoft apps versus third-party apps and apps specific to your tenant. There are app setup policies you could use, and you can highlight based on the app's position, their icon in the left rail. You could highlight different apps by pinning them. You can manage custom app uploads at the org-wide level or the team level or the user level. So it's not one size fits all. You could have an app only in use for one specific team in your entire organization. And you can also publish custom apps to Microsoft Teams. There are various distribution methods you could use. If you publish to the Teams App Store at appsource.microsoft.com, those apps are available to everyone. If you publish to the tenant apps catalog, the apps are available to all users in your organization only. Sideloading is another option for use with developers. We can customize the App Store from the Teams Admin Center. We can create our own App Store page. We can customize it with organizational colors and background and logo. And now I'll demo Teams and collaboration settings, showing you how to manage team resources, configure channel and messaging policies, manage app settings, and then test out those configured policy settings.
All right. We need to modify the IT department M365 group. We're going to add Teams features to it. So we're signed in as Joni Sherman. We are going to join or create a team, create team from a group or team, specifically an M365 group. the IT department group. We'll create, and then we'll choose the ellipsis, those 3 dots, and choose to manage the team. Team owner there, Joni Sherman, and we've got guests Alan DeYoung and Alex Wilbur. So we've created a new team with the Teams desktop client by leveraging an existing M365 group. Now we'll create a team using PowerShell. The team will be called CA Office. First we'll sign in with Joni Sherman's credentials after running the Connect Microsoft Teams commandlet. We'll run the new team commandlet. Make the visibility public for the CA Office team. Now we'll add Alex Wilbur to the group. And add Alan DeYoung to the group as well. We'll create a channel called Support now, and another channel called Recruiting. And we'll create a private channel called Administration. And we'll disconnect from Teams. Now signed in as Joni. We can see a private channel called Administration underneath the CA Office team. So we've successfully created a team named CA Office with Alex and Alan as members and Joni the owner. We didn't specify an owner in the PowerShell commandlet. It was run in the context of Joni. So she was added as an owner automatically. And we created a couple of public channels and a private channel as well. Now let's create a team using the Graph API. We're going to create a new team called Early Adopters with minimal settings, like a public join option, and another team with multiple existing channels called Tech Meetings. So we're at the Graph Explorer. That's at developer.microsoft.com/graph/graph-explorer. We're going to sign in as Joni Sherman. The upper left, there's a button there. And we're looking at permissions now. Specifically the teams.create permission. We're going to consent to the use of that. Now we'll go to the request body. Paste in relevant syntax about early adopters. and run query. And that's accepted. Now we'll create a tech meetings team. And a welcome hall channel and other channels as well. Now we will archive and unarchive a team. So we're back in the Teams admin center as Joni Sherman. From the teams on the left side pane, we'll choose Manage Teams and archive the sales teams by selecting Sales and Archive from the top pane. And then we'll make the SharePoint site read-only for team members and choose Archive. Now we can see the archive status in orange. Let's check the archive team. Signed in as Lynn Robbins. We'll go in the archived section and choose the sales team. And then sales shows up under the hidden teams section. If we go to the general channel under the sales team, you can see that the new conversation option is not available. So let's unarchive the sales team from the admin center. Choose unarchive, and now the status field will change to active again. We can choose the three dots from the right of the sales team and choose Show. Now we've successfully archived a team and reviewed the limited functionality of archived teams. Now we'll delete one of the teams created. So from the three dots to the right of the sales team, we'll choose Delete the Team and confirm that I understand everything will be deleted and delete team. What if I change my mind? I can restore the group from the Azure AD Admin Center. Azure Active Directory, deleted groups. You can see the sales group there. And select the checkbox and restore group. I would say trust but verify. Let's go back as Lynn Robbins here in the team's client. And we can see the sales team appearing again. And that we can see the members of the team have been restored as well. So now we've successfully deleted a team with the team's web client and restored it with the Azure AD portal. Let's now manage team members with dynamic membership. Back from the Azure AD Admin Center, Azure Active Directory and Groups. Get to the CA Office group. Properties. The membership type will go from assigned to dynamic user. We'll add a dynamic query. The property will be account enabled equals true. And we'll add another expression, usage location equals CA. And we'll click Save twice. We get a warning about dynamic membership rules. We'll say yes. Let's click on Overview now, and we'll see the membership processing status field. After a few minutes, that field will reveal Update Complete. Then we can choose Members and refresh, and now we can see Alex Wilbur is in the list of members, and also that Alan DeYoung has been removed. We'll go to Owners, and we can still see Joni is the owner of the group, even though she does not match the dynamic group criteria. So we've converted an M365 group from static or assigned to dynamic. Membership is controlled by the usage location of the user and if the account is enabled. Any user with the usage location Canada is auto-added to the team. Now we'll configure channel and message policies to manage the creation of new private channels and the available tools for users in chat, starting with creating a messaging policy for Jiffies, memes, and stickers. So from the Teams Admin Center, we're signed in as Joni. Left nav, we'll choose Messaging Policies, Add, and we're going to add a name. Regular users without fun stuff. The description is policy to disable Jiffies, stickers, and memes in conversations. So we'll turn off Jiffies, memes, and stickers and leave the rest of the settings at default and hit save. Now we'll choose the check mark next to regular users without fun stuff and manage users. And we'll add Alex, Lynn, and Diego to the policy. And it can take up to 24 hours for settings to take effect. Next, we'll manage private channels in a team. So we'll choose Teams, Manage Teams, then the Sales Team and Channels tab. And we'll add a private channel. We'll call this Confidential Sales. Confidential private sales channel. Type of private. And the channel owner is Lynn Robbins. And apply. Now we'll check the private channel from the Teams web client. Now we can see a new private channel called Confidential Sales with a small padlock icon. Next, we'll manage app settings by disabling third-party storage providers. We want the users to use OneDrive and SharePoint as primary data storage locations and have Box as an alternative for all file collaborations. So we're going to deactivate all the other third-party storage providers except for Box. So Team Settings, we'll go to the Files section and turn off Citrix Files, Dropbox, and Google Drive and Ignite. Now we'll edit the default org-wide app policy. The company wants to add tasks by Planner and To-Do as the default app for all existing teams by editing the default org-wide app policy. We'll go under Teams, Apps, and Setup Policies, Global, Pinned Apps, and Add Apps. We'll select Global and search Planner. We'll see the Task by Planner and To-Do app. Click Add twice. And now we'll see Tasks by Planner and To-Do is listed in the Pinned Apps section. And choose Save. Then we'll edit the default app permission policy. Again, from Teams Apps, Manage Apps. We'll type Google and highlight Google Analytics. We're going to block that from the top menu and block again. Now we'll manage policy packages. To avoid the administrative overhead of managing large numbers of policies individually. To avoid the administrative overhead managing large numbers of policies individually for groups of different users, we'll evaluate using policy packages to group policies into logical units. So we'll review the default policy packages and change a default policy package for first-line workers. So under policy packages, we'll choose the frontline worker policy package, and we'll edit. And we're going to turn on the setting of send urgent messages using priority notifications and click Save. Then we're going to choose a calling policy for frontline workers. We're going to prevent toll bypass and send calls through the PSTN. And change the busy on busy is available when in a call to enabled. Then click Save and choose Back to go to the policy packages overview. Make sure the frontline worker policy package is checked and choose Manage Users from the top menu. Type Alan into the search box. We'll choose Alan DeYoung and apply. We'll choose Users from the left side pane and then Alan DeYoung. And the Policies tab. And below, Assign Policies, we can see the policies assigned from the Frontline Worker policy package. So we've successfully modified policies from an existing policy package and assigned the package to a single user. So this will help you assign the same set of policies to a group of users working in the same role or requiring the same access. Now we'll build a flow using Power Automate in Teams. So we'll create the IT support org-wide team. We'll create a team from scratch, an org-wide team, and call it IT support and click Create. Now we're going to create a form from office.com/launch/forms, signed in as Joni Sherman. We'll click New Form. We'll call this one Submit a Ticket. And we'll say, please provide the information. In the description field, our member from IT department will contact you as soon as possible. And then add new and text, entering what is the issue. Now we'll install Power Automate in Teams from teams.microsoft.com. Go into Apps and Power Automate. Choose that and Add. Now we'll create a flow. So we'll choose Power Automate from the left nav and create. The template will be notify when let's start over. We'll choose the template called notify a team when a new forms response is submitted. Call this flow report issue. And next. And we'll choose the submit a ticket form. We're going to notify the IT department. Channel will be general. Then create flow. And done. Now we'll add the form to the general channel of the IT support team. We'll add a tab and select Forms from the Add a Tab window. We'll select Add an existing form and Submit a ticket. And save. And in the general channel of the IT support team, we'll choose the Fill/Submit a Ticket tab and type in the issue. I need help to create a team for external partners and click Submit. And from the General tab of the IT department team, we'll see a post via Power Automate. So now we've successfully created a flow from Power Automate in Teams, which will notify members of the IT department when users submit a request ticket. Let's test configured policy settings. So we'll test them on a client with Lynn Robbins compared to the settings available to Joni Sherman. So we'll test messaging policy and private channel access. Signed in as Lynn Robbins. We'll click the new chat icon. We'll choose Joni Sherman to start the conversation. And we have no Jiffies, memes, or stickers icons available as expected, although we do have an emojis button.
This concludes part 1. Let's recap all the content we've seen so far. In Module 1, we explored Microsoft Teams Admin Center and PowerShell as part of planning and deploying Microsoft Teams, and examined Teams lifecycle management and governance. In Module 2, we discussed different levels of external access as well as security and compliance settings for Microsoft Teams. We also looked at crucial network settings you need to know before deploying Teams. And in Module 3, we saw several ways to create and manage Teams as well as allowing for different kinds of chat and channel collaboration. Finally, we looked at how you can extend Teams capabilities using apps. Thank you for your attendance so far, and we look forward to seeing you next time for part 2 of this Microsoft 365 Virtual Training Day. Enable hybrid work with Microsoft Teams.